Hello and welcome back to Bite Size Boxing. So something I wanted to discuss today was, now the dust has firmly settled on Usyk versus Dubois 2, what are Usyk's next steps? Who should he fight next? Of course, Joseph Parker is mandated to fight him with the WBO. I believe it's the WBC who is Ajit Caballero is either the final eliminator or he's going to be mandated shortly. I can't remember which one. So these are the two obvious options that people are talking about. Is there anybody else? Is there anyone I would like to see? And yeah, what does the landscape look like for Alexander Usyk? So I think in an ideal world, a lot of people, myself included, would probably just advise Usyk to retire now. He's got nothing left to prove. He's been on a murderous row. Obviously, he's fought Joshua twice. He's fought Dubois twice. He's fought Fury twice. Now, he hasn't got the depth of resume because he's essentially fought three of the top guys twice. But I would say he's now done enough to really solidify himself as no worse than probably a top 5 of all time heavyweight. So for me, Usyk's legacy is already established. There's nothing he really needs to do from here to prove himself to someone like me. I think he's a great now already. That being said, it would be good to see if he could thicken up that resume. So without further ado, let's talk about the prospective fights that he could end up fighting. So the first fighter I'd like to talk about is Joseph Parker. Now, when talking about Joseph Parker, everybody talks about his recent run and the 3 fights he's recently had, and how great that run is and how that is deserving of a world title fight. Of course, he has worked his way into a mandatory position as well. Now, I do have a differing perspective than most on Joseph Parker. Although I do think he is worthy of a title shot, I think he's done enough, I don't share the perspective that he's greatly improved, he's massively improved under Andy Lee, he's punching harder than ever, and he's a completely new fighter. I don't really buy into that, if I'm honest. I think his recent run is more indicative of the people he's been fighting in many ways than Joseph Parker himself. So for example, his first fight that really got him back on the comeback trail and really in people's eyes was against Deontay Wilder. He beat Deontay Wilder over 12. Now, from what we've seen post that, Deontay Wilder is shot. He looked shot in that fight. He was unable to let the right hand go as he normally would do. So this is a very much jaded Deontay Wilder. That being said, I was somebody that when they were both champions, when Parker had the WBO and Wilder had the WBC, I was calling for that fight back then around 2015, 2016, and I was somebody who was actually massively in the minority who thought Parker would win then, just purely based on boxing ability. So I do think that Parker always had the ability to beat Wilder, but then again, how good was Wilder in retrospect? That's something we've got to be honest about here. A lot of Wilder's title defenses were abysmal. In fact, all of them were, other than Fury, and he lost to Fury. So there is that about Wilder, really, and in all fairness, Wilder was definitely jaded by the time he fought Parker. But again, it was a good win on paper. It was one that he went in as the underdog on. Obviously, Wilder was supposed to beat Parker to set up the AJ fight, and obviously that didn't happen, and Parker was the one that scuppered that. So in fairness, it was a good win, but with context applied, it isn't maybe the great win that some people give it credit for. After that, he fought Zhilei Zhang over in Saudi again, and again, for me, that is a fight that needs context applied. Yes, he beat Zhilei Zhang. He, again, beat him over 12. But I think a lot of people don't really remember that fight because it wasn't a great fight to watch. It was a pretty soporific affair. It was pretty boring. Joseph Parker just outworked and kind of just pot-shotted and got out of the way of a very cumbersome and just slow and lethargic Zhilei Zhang, because of course Zhilei Zhang is essentially a 6-round fighter, probably not even that really, sort of a 4-round fighter, and once you get out of those early rounds, there's not a lot he does other than throw single shots and he's blowing out his arse. So Joseph Parker outworked that guy, and in that fight he still got dropped twice, which again is something I don't see people mentioning. You know, it was a pretty uneventful fight. He did what he had to do, but he still got dropped twice. So it wasn't a scintillating performance by any means, and it isn't something that I look at and go, wow, I really want to see Joseph Parker in against the best on the back of that. And then, of course, we have the Martin Bakole fight. Now, Martin Bakole, in my opinion, was kind of a boogeyman of sorts. I do think Billy Nelson maybe overhyped the boogeyman nature of Martin Bakole somewhat, but that's his job at the end of the day, he's his manager. So he did beat Bakole. This is Parker. Parker beat Bakole in 3 rounds, which on paper is a fantastic win, and you would say is one of the wins of the year on paper. But of course, that isn't really, without context, that isn't how it went down. It wasn't a great win because, of course, Martin Bakole came in on about 48 hours' notice. Daniel Dubois pulled out of the fight with Parker, and Martin Bakole was sat eating fufu on the sofa in Congo and had to fly, I think, 2 or 3 commercial flights over the course of 36 hours to get to Saudi. He arrived having slept, I think he said, about 90 minutes, 2 hours of sleep, and then literally climbed off the sofa. He looked knackered. He was pretty much yawning on his way to the ring. And he got knocked out in 3. You know, he was in gross shape. He was over 300, I think it was about 315 pounds for that fight. Awful shape. I mean, what can you say? Yes, Joseph Parker beat who was in front of him, but Joseph Parker beat a guy who really should never have been there. He hadn't had a training camp. At that point, I think the fight took place in February, and Bakole hadn't been in the gym since August. I mean, what are we doing here, you know? So yes, again, on paper it's a good win, but massive context needs to be applied. That wasn't the best version of Bakole, not even close to it. So again, how good of a win is that? So once you kind of factor all those things in, I do think there is a massive asterisk next to this run of Parker's. Yes, it's good, but once you apply context to those 3 recent wins, I mean, how great are they? So yeah, I see why people say Parker deserves a shot. Of course, he's manoeuvred his way into a mandatory position, so on paper, yes, he does deserve it. But I don't know, man. I just don't think that... Again, even when I visualise that fight, if I'm just being honest, I don't see it being all that competitive. I don't think Parker has improved enough to challenge Usyk and to be particularly competitive with Usyk, if I'm honest. Yes, he's got that hand speed, but post-elbow surgery, I'd say that's slowed down a little bit. And again, he's had a decent run of 3 fights on paper, but again, when you apply context, you've got a guy that arrived with no sleep on about 2 days of notice, a guy who dropped him twice and essentially isn't, he's not a 12-round fighter to begin with, and a guy who was shot. So for me, I wouldn't be the most excited to see the Parker fight, but that's just me personally. Then you have Agit Kabayel. Now, Agit Kabayel, of course, rose to prominence all those years ago, nearly a decade ago, back in 2017 with a decision win over Derek Chisora over in Monaco. Now, that was a very flat Chisora, that has to be said. Chisora clearly wasn't motivated for the fight, but that was where Agit Kabayel rose to prominence in the first place. Now, it's an interesting one with Kabayel because he then was out in the wilderness for the best part of 7 or 8 years, and he wasn't fighting anybody. He did nearly get that last-minute call to fight, I think, Joshua a couple of times, and also Fury a couple of times when they were needing sort of late opponents. And it does make you wonder if they had been drafted in, if he had been drafted in for those fights, he probably would have been an upsetter, wouldn't he? That being said, of course, those fights didn't happen. But his real breakout, again, was on a Saudi show against Arslanbek Makhmudov. Now, in that Makhmudov fight, again, I think we have to apply asterisks. How good was Makhmudov, really? But he dealt with Makhmudov in double quick time, knocked him over, I think, 3 or 4 times, and finished him in 4 rounds. Brilliant performance by Kabayel, and really announced himself back on the heavyweight scene. He then went in there against Frank Sanchez, and he knocked out Frank Sanchez in 7 rounds. Again, a good performance, but I will be honest, again, I think it's only fair, given I just criticised Parker, there's an asterisk for that performance as well. Frank Sanchez was clearly injured. He was nursing, I believe, a knee injury in that fight. He was wearing braces on his legs, and he's actually subsequently had to go out for surgery. So Frank Sanchez is a guy who, he's a mover, he's constantly using his legs in and out to try and move off the back foot. He's an outboxer. That's Frank Sanchez's style. So Frank Sanchez is literally, his biggest asset is his legs, and that was taken away from him in that fight. So yes, Kabayel beat him, but in fairness, he was fighting a guy who was unable to fight his fight. So again, a good win on paper, but there's an asterisk to it. Then we have the Zhilei Zhang fight. Now, again, Zhilei Zhang at that point had already lost to Joseph Parker, so you can look at that and go, well, he's fighting Parker's leftovers, but he did a lot better job of Zhang than Parker did. He stopped Zhang in 6 rounds, absolutely killed him to the body, folded him in 2, and Zhang wanted no more. Again, a very good performance. I'm not going to be as critical about this one, if I'm honest, because I do rate Zhang highly. Yes, he is a 5-round fighter at best, but he's very dangerous for those 5 rounds, and Caballero navigated them perfectly. And over those 3 fights, I personally think he's shown more to me than Parker has in terms of dynamism, in terms of ability, because something that Caballero showed against Chisora all those years ago was that he's brilliant on the back foot and he's a good outboxer. But something he's shown in these 3 fights is that he can be aggressive and he's a great body puncher. He can change levels from body to head, and he's got a couple more strings to his bow than we thought he had. And there's something about that I actually think is a bit more of an interest going into a potential Usyk fight than with Parker. Because with Parker, he is a little bit more one-paced, he is a little bit more one-dimensional, whereas with Caballero, as I said, he's shown us more strings to his bow. He can fight going backwards, he can fight going forwards, and he does seem to be able to do both at a very good level. Especially that body punching. Now, we do know that Usyk is vulnerable to the body. I'm not saying he's, finding the body is one thing with Usyk. It's easy to say he's vulnerable to the body, but it's not necessarily easy to find the body. That being said, Caballero is a fantastic body puncher, so you would look at that fight stylistically and you'd say, that is an interesting one. And I'd quite like to see it because, again, Caballero has the youth, he has the ignorance of being undefeated as well. This is another thing about Parker that I'm not too keen on. Because with Parker, he has lost before. He's been outboxed by people like Dillian Whyte. Now, I honestly don't think that Parker... Some people will completely disagree with me. I don't think Parker has improved massively since that Whyte fight. Yes, he may have improved a little bit, but I don't think he's improved such leaps and bounds that he's a completely different fighter from, the same fighter that was getting stopped by Joyce or getting outboxed by Whyte. And if you're losing to those kind of people, then I don't think that necessarily stands you in the best of stead going in against somebody like Alexander Usyk. Now, I do understand it's chess, it isn't checkers. Boxing is rock, paper, scissors. It is one of those sports where just because, fighter A can beat fighter B, that doesn't mean that fighter B will beat fighter C, etc. I understand all of this. That and still, I just personally don't think that Joseph Parker has enough to beat Alexander Usyk. It's one of those fights that maybe I'm completely wrong on. Just from an outside looking in, I don't see it as particularly competitive, or not as competitive as it would need to be to interest me, essentially. And finally, I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. There is a final third fighter, just to suggest, which is a bit of a wild card. Now, I don't expect this fight to happen. Personally, it would actually be my preferred fight. But as I said, I don't see this happening at all. And that is Jai Opetaia. Jai Opetaia, of course, I think unanimously agreed is the best cruiserweight in the world. We're just waiting for him to prove it by mopping up with all the belts because the other champions don't want to face him. Jai Opetaia is a phenomenal fighter. Of course, beat long-reigning champion Maris Breedis a couple of years ago to really cement himself on the world scene. And then went in there again with defences against the likes of Zorro and Massey and Nyaika, and looked fantastic in all of those fights. The David Nyaika fight was a bit of a shootout. He did get hit in that fight, but this is what I like about Jai Opetaia. Jai Opetaia is an aggressive fighter. He's not afraid to go for the jugular, and I think his athleticism bails him out, to be honest with you, and this is why I would like to see his move up to heavyweight sooner rather than later. He's already 30, I think turning 31 either early next year or this year. So he's got to get a move on because his style is not a style that lends itself to aging particularly well. And I actually think, although he's quite undersized, he's not a particularly big cruiserweight, let alone as a heavyweight. Against someone like Usyk, Usyk is obviously not a big heavyweight to begin with, and stylistically, I just think someone like Jai Opetaia is very interesting because he's going to be a very different puzzle to fix than any of the other guys that we're talking about at the moment up at heavyweight. You see, with Jai Opetaia, he's incredibly explosive, incredibly fast. He uses that in and out foot movement, that almost like Dimitri Bivol-like feet, I think is a good way of putting it, where he's sort of constantly hopping, constantly bouncing, he's got a bounce to his step, and he would be so much quicker than anybody Usyk has seen in years. He might even be the fastest person Usyk has been in with. So for me, I really like that potential Opetaia fight. Now, again, I don't expect it to happen. I expect Opetaia to hang around at cruiserweight and wait to mop up at cruiserweight and then finally move up. And then when the belts are probably fragmented by that point, and then he'll probably pick one up or fight for one or challenge one at least. That's how it will probably work out, but I would love to see that fight. Yes, I understand he would be undersized, he would not be the biggest heavyweight, he probably would rehydrate to about 210 pounds, if that, and that's with putting on weight. So Again, I do think it's an unlikely fight, but it is a fight that interests me. I mean, even if you want to compare him sort of fight for fight with other fighters we've mentioned, he fought Jack Massey, as did Joseph Parker. There's not even a comparison over who did a better job. Of course, Jaya Pattaya did a far better job with Jack Massey than Joseph Parker did. Joseph Parker laboured to a decision with Jack Massey, whereas Jack Massey got cleared out in 6 rounds by Jaya Pattaya. Jaya Pattaya is an incredibly exciting fighter. He's one of the best fighters to watch in the sport at the moment. So for me, that would be a fight that I would love to see against Usyk, because it would be such a clash of styles. It would be crash bang wallop. Of course, I've been saying that I want to see someone rush Usyk, come at Usyk. Now, it remains to be seen. I don't think he's necessarily got the physical strength to do it in the way that I would like to see. You know, he's not going to do a Chisora job in mauling and, you know, bullying Usyk. But he's going to go in there and he is going to go crash bang wallop, and he is going to fight in a style that I believe you would need to beat Usyk. Cabello may do that. Parker, I'll be frank, I'm not sure would. I think Joseph Parker would, similar to someone like Dubois, probably try and stand off and box a little bit more. I don't think he would be aggressive enough to beat Usyk. I don't think he would do what was necessary to beat him. Cabello, I think with the body punching, is an interesting style, but for me, if I had to put money on it, Jaya Pattaya is the person I would put the most money on to beat Usyk at this point in time, just based on styles. But you let me know what you think. I'd be very interested to know. Again, I know some of the things I've said in this video probably will not be the most popular, but again, it's just my opinion. You let me know what you think. I'd be very interested to know. Thank you very much. Cheers, guys.